Hello and welcome. In this video I'm going to talk about SVG's basic shapes and primitives. SVG itself comes with several features. Among those features are some basic shapes that are simply defined by element tags. And I'll start by showing you what that is. Right here I have an open code pen. It's blank right now. I don't have anything in it beyond an empty div with the class container. So I'm going to go ahead and define an SVG viewport inside of this div. And I do that by just specifying an SVG tag. I'll give it a height of 600 and a width of same. Okay, so this is a basic viewport, and you can think of a viewport as a window to your SVG world, if so to speak. It's important not to think of it as a frame or an image with bounded frames. Think of it as just a window to your SVG content, and I'll explain more about that later, but just keep that in mind as we go along. What I'll do is give it a comment here, just so you can think of it as a viewport. This viewport is 600 pixels wide by 600 pixels tall. And the way the coordinate system works in SVG is that the 0, 0 position on your viewport is in the top left corner. So x equals 0, y equals 0 is in this top left corner here. And that means that the 600 position is in the bottom right corner. So x equals 600 and y equals 600 is in the bottom right. So the coordinate numbers go higher on the x-axis when you move to the right, and they go higher on the y-axis when you move downwards. So let's introduce the first element here. The first element is called a Rect, and that is defined with a simple Rect tag, and it comes with a few attributes you can set right away. You can set the x and y coordinates where you want to draw the rectangle, and the registration on a rectangle is in the top left corner as well. So I'll give the x position as 10, and I'll give the y position as 10 as well, and I'll go ahead and I'll give the height, specify the height as 50 and the width as 75. Okay, I'll stop here for now, and you can see that I've just drawn a rectangle at the x equals 10 and y equals 10 position on the viewport, and given it a height of 50 and a width of 70 pixels. There's some more attributes I can define on a rectangle, and one of them is the fill, and the fill defines the color, the interior color of the shape, of any shape. So let's try giving it an interior color of lime green. As you can see, the rectangle on the left is turned lime green. There's also another attribute called the stroke, and the stroke defines the color of the boundary around any shape, and I'll just give it a regular green color. And it might be hard for you to see, but the stroke is there, but right now the default size of that stroke is 1 pixel. So in order to change that, I'll go back. There's another attribute called stroke width, and I'll give it a size of 5. So this way now we can actually see our border around our rectangle. Let's move on to the next one. The next shape to introduce is the circle. And the circle is defined by using a simple circle tag, and it takes a few basic attributes, and we define the center point using CX and CY. So I'll set the CX to 100, and I'll set the CY to 120, and then I'll set the radius to 25. Okay, so if I stop there, you see that it's drawn a circle at the exact coordinates I specified. That's the 100, 120 location, and the radius is 25. Circle also has the same attributes as the Rect, one being the fill. I'll change that to something else. Let's try sky blue. And also has a stroke. Let's just change that to blue. And also has stroke width. Let's set that to 4. Okay. And that's all you need to know about the circle. The API is fairly consistent with the rectangle. So let's move on quickly. The next one I want to introduce is the ellipse, if you remember your 4th grade math. An ellipse takes similar coordinates, cx and cy. I'll specify these as 220 and 120. The difference with the ellipse is that the ellipse has 2 variables that describe its radius. It has a radius size along the x-axis and a radius size along the y-axis. The radius along the x-axis I'll set to 30. And the radius along the y-axis I'll set to 15. I'll also give it the same fill as the circle. And I'll give it a stroke of the same. And a stroke width of 4 as well. Right. And there we have a circle here, and then we have our ellipse. Just for fun, I'll increase the radius here to, let's just make it 20. And that is how to define an ellipse. Next up, I'll show you how to create a line. And a line is defined by providing starting coordinates and ending coordinates. So the starting coordinates are x1 and y1. And the ending coordinates are x2 and y2. And, of course, we can't forget, since a line doesn't have an enclosing shape, we actually need to specify the stroke color. And I'll go ahead and specify a stroke width as well. Okay, and there we have a line. Okay, the next shape is a polyline. And a polyline is simply a series of connected lines. And we define that by using the polyline tag. And it takes a special attribute called points. And in this attribute, we have a series of coordinates. And then I'll go ahead and define a stroke. And a stroke width of 8. And let's stop here for now. So let's take a look at this. It drew this shape here. And that's what a polyline is. It's just a series of connected lines. And these lines are specified by providing a series of coordinates in a points array. And these coordinates are just the points between each line segment. If you look very closely, you also see something funny looking here. There's like a black shape attached to this polyline. And that's because SVG interprets polylines as actual shapes, and each shape has a fill. And as you recall, the default fill color is black. Now, the only difference between a polyline and any other shape is that a polyline isn't an enclosed shape. The shapes can actually be open, as you can see here. this is not a closed shape, it's open, but it still has a fill. So in order to get rid of that fill, if you like, we go ahead and add a fill attribute and give it a value of none. And that gets rid of the fill. Next up, we have a polygon. Polygons are very much like polylines. In fact, almost identical except for the tag name. They also have an attribute called points, which take a series of coordinates. And all the usual suspects: stroke color, fill, and stroke width. And that is a polygon. The only difference between a polyline, or I should say a key difference between a polyline and a polygon, is that where the polyline is an open shape, the polygon is always going to be a closed shape. So it'll always connect your last points to the first one. So I'll go ahead here and take out the last point, this one here, and you see that it always, there you go, you see it always connects the points and maintaining the closed shape. Okay, let's put it back and move on to the last shape. The last shape is the most complex and the most versatile of all the SVG shapes, and that is the path. And this is the shape you're going to see the most in almost all of your SVG work. I have one prepared here for you. I'll just paste it in because it can get rather complex. And right there we have the famous Twitter bird defined by this path here. You've seen the fill, which sets the color to the Twitter color, and the main path attribute is this D attribute. This D attribute accepts this gigantic long string you see here, which looks like a complete mess, but there's a method to this madness, and this is a language in and of itself. I'm not going to go into the details of what this all means, but just suffice it to say that you're more than likely never going to have to create one of these by hand. All honesty, most of the time you'll create a shape in your graphics tool, either Adobe Illustrator, Sketch, or Inkscape, and then export that path into your HTML page or SVG file. So that's all I'll say about this string here. But the path itself is just a regular SVG element. As you can see, it takes a fill. I can add a stroke if I want. In fact, I will. I'll just add a royal blue stroke, and I'll set this stroke width to 4. And there we have a blue stroke around the Twitter shape. And that's really all there is to paths. If you are interested in learning more about how to understand this long string applied to the D attributes, I have left some notes in the course materials and the course resources with some links that you can follow and read up some more on exactly what all this means. And that is it for basic SVG primitives. Let's move on. We have a few more SVG features to talk about, and then we'll move on to Green Talk.